They started showing up at 7 o'clock in the morning. 50 charter buses rolling down a private gravel road that belonged to me and nobody else. By 7:40, the first bus had stopped just 6 in from a locked steel gate, with 49 more stacked behind it, stretching all the way back to the county highway. And the HOA president was standing at my fence, phone pressed to his ear, looking like a man who had just realized his entire plan had one major problem he never bothered to check. The problem was my gate. And my gate was locked. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching all of it play out. My name is Edward Call. I am 51 years old, and I spent 23 years working in event logistics and large-scale venue operations before I bought land and walked away from that world completely. I had seen enough badly planned events to last a lifetime. I own 114 acres in Bozeman, Montana, in Gallatin County. It is the kind of land that makes people understand right away why someone would pay whatever it takes to own it. Rolling grass, a creek cutting through the lower section, a line of lodgepole pine along the northern edge, and a clear view of the Bridger Range from my back porch that I have never once taken for granted in the 6 years I have lived here. I run a small cattle operation. I lease out the hay fields to a nearby farmer. I live a quiet life, and I prefer it that way. What I did not like was the Ridgemont Valley Community Association deciding my land was the answer to a problem they had created on their own. The Ridgemont Valley development sits on 340 acres east of my property. It was built in phases between 2015 and 2020, ending up with 312 homes centered around a clubhouse and a network of shared spaces managed by the HOA. For the first 4 years, the association was run professionally. The board understood their role. They managed the community, not their egos. During that time, I had zero interaction with them because there was no reason to. Then the board changed, and a man named Stuart Briggs became president. Stuart was 48 years old and had made a lot of money in commercial real estate in Denver before moving to Montana. He came in with the kind of energy that felt like he wanted to turn the place into something it was never meant to be. He was quick, intense, and always seemed like he was trying to prove something. To him, the HOA was not a responsibility. It was a stage. Within his first year, he increased the community events budget by 300%, launched a summer festival that got regional media attention, and started planning what he called the event that would put Ridgemont Valley on the map. That event was an autumn heritage tour. His idea was to run a large bus tour through the surrounding countryside, showing off farms, ranches, and the natural beauty of Gallatin County. He hired a company out of Bozeman called Cascade Charter Services and booked 50 buses for what he expected would be around 2,500 people. Tickets were sold to residents and the public through local media and HOA social pages. What Stuart did not do was contact any of the landowners whose property the tour would cross. Not one. In one case, the route went directly over private land using a road that led to a Forest Service access point he planned to use as the main scenic stop. That road was mine. 9/10 of a mile of gravel cutting across my southern pasture. I built it myself in 2019 so I could reach the creek at the back of my property. At the end of it was a gate I installed and maintained, connecting to a Forest Service trailhead. That gate was also mine. I found out about the tour 11 days before it was supposed to happen. Not from Stuart, but from a woman named Patricia Hensley who lived in Ridgemont Valley. She had bought a ticket and called me, excited, asking if I was looking forward to having so many visitors pass through my land. She had seen the event page, which described a scenic private ranch road crossing, along with a photo clearly taken from my pasture looking toward the creek in the Bridger Range. She thought it was great that I had agreed to be part of it. I told Patricia I had not agreed to anything. No one had contacted me. I asked her to send me the link, which she did right away. I sat at my kitchen table and read the entire page twice. I looked at the photo of my land, taken from somewhere along my fence, used in their promotion without my permission. And in that moment, everything became very clear. I knew exactly what I was dealing with, and exactly how I was going to handle it. I called my attorney, Ranetta Shaw, who handles property and land use law in Bozeman and had helped me when I bought the land. I explained everything and sent her the link. She called me back within the hour. She said the situation was simple and completely in my favor. The road was private property. Stewart had no right to use it. The gate at the end was on my land and under my control. Advertising a route across private property without permission was not just wrong, it could expose the HOA to serious liability if anything went wrong during the event. She asked me how I wanted to move forward. I told her I had two options in mind. The first was to send a cease and desist right away, forcing them to change the route and remove anything related to my property. The second was to stay quiet, let everything proceed, and wait until 50 buses showed up at a locked gate, then handle it with full proof of exactly what they had done. Ranata paused for a moment and said the first option was cleaner from a legal point of view because it gave Stewart a chance to fix his mistake before it became public. I told her I understood that. But I also told her that in the last 90 seconds, I had already thought through 11 days' worth of decisions. And the reason I was leaning toward the second option was not about getting even. It was about something more specific. A man who could stand at my fence, take a photo of my land without permission, use it to sell tickets, and plan a 50-bus route across my property without making a single call, was a man who needed to learn exactly what that kind of assumption leads to in the real world. Ranata told me she understood exactly why I was thinking that way. She said if I went with the second option, I needed to record everything from this point forward and avoid doing anything that could be seen as interfering with the event beyond simply using my legal right to control access to my own property. I told her that was exactly the plan. She said to call her the morning of the event. I spent the next 10 days getting ready, quietly and carefully. I had a locksmith install a new heavy-duty padlock on the gate at my southern pasture where the gravel road begins. I took clear photos of the installation and kept the only 2 keys with me at all times. I set up 2 trail cameras aimed at the gate from different angles so I would have full video coverage of everything that happened there on the day of the event. I pulled all the promotional material from the HOA event page and saved screenshots of everything, including the photo of my land, the tour description mentioning the scenic private ranch road crossing, the ticket prices, and the expected attendance numbers. I sent all of it to Ranata along with a written timeline explaining when I found out about the event and how. I also asked her to prepare a formal demand package ready to file as soon as the event was over. The morning of the tour came on a clear October Saturday. The light had that sharp Montana fall look that makes the mountains seem almost unreal. I was on my porch with a cup of coffee at 6:30 when I heard the first bus coming down the county road. By 7, the lead bus had turned onto the approach to my southern pasture. By 7:15, it was stopped at my locked gate. By 7:40, all 50 buses were lined up behind it, forming a long column that ran the full length of my property along the county road and even wrapped around the corner for another quarter mile. I watched all of it from my porch without moving. Stewart showed up at 7:52 in a black SUV. I watched him step out, look at the lock, then the gate, then the long line of buses behind him. Then he looked toward my house and saw me sitting there. A few seconds later, he walked over to the fence and called out. I set my coffee down and walked over to meet him at the fence line, each of us standing on our own side. He introduced himself like we had never lived near each other for 6 years. It was the kind of introduction people use when they are trying to take control of a situation that is already slipping. He said there seemed to be a misunderstanding about the gate and asked if I had a key so I could open it and let the tour continue. I told him there was no misunderstanding. The gate was locked because it was on my private property. And I locked it because 50 charter buses were about to drive across my land without my permission. And I was not allowing that. He said the tour had been planned for months, that around 2,000 people had bought tickets, that the route had been publicly advertised, and that he was asking me, as a neighbor, to work with him. I told him I understood all of that. And I told him none of it was my responsibility. He had planned a route across my land without contacting me. He had used a photo of my property in his promotional materials without asking. He had arranged for 50 buses to drive through my land without once checking if I would allow it. And as he could clearly see, I was not going to allow it. As we stood there, I watched his expression change step by step. After 23 years in event logistics, I knew exactly what I was seeing. First came confidence, like this was a small problem that could be talked through. Then came the shift when that didn't work. Then pressure, with comments about community, cooperation, and the disappointment of 2,000 people, all clearly meant to make me feel responsible for something I had nothing to do with. And finally, there was nothing left. Just a man standing in front of a locked gate with 50 buses behind him and no idea what to do next. I told him I was going back to my porch to finish my coffee. If he wanted to discuss anything further, his attorney could call Ranata Shah. I gave him her number and walked back to the house. What happened over the next 4 hours, both from what I saw on my porch and later on the trail camera footage, was a clear example of what happens when large events are planned without proper checks. Cascade Charter Services had 50 buses sitting on a county road, engines running, drivers waiting on a schedule that depended on a route Stewart had given them, with no backup plan. The people who had arrived in their own cars, parked along the road and in a staging area near the development entrance, were being told by HOA volunteers that there was a short delay due to an access coordination issue. That explanation did not hold up for long. For the first hour, Stewart stayed on his phone. Even from a distance, I could tell he was making call after call, trying to fix something that could not be fixed in that moment. None of those calls seemed to help. At 9:15, a Gallatin County Sheriff's deputy showed up. Stewart had apparently called, thinking law enforcement might force me to open the gate. The deputy walked over to my fence line, and I met him there. I showed him my deed on my phone, the photos of the gate installation, and explained everything in about 4 minutes. He nodded, walked back to Stewart, and they talked for a moment. I couldn't hear what was said. But a minute later, the deputy got back in his vehicle and drove away. No action was taken against me, and the gate stayed exactly as it was, locked. At 10:30, Ranata arrived. I had called her at 8, and she chose to come in person. I hadn't asked her to, but I was glad she did. The moment she stepped out of her car, it was obvious to Stewart, and whoever he was calling, that I had legal support on site and ready. She walked over to the fence and spoke with him for about 12 minutes while I stood nearby and listened. What I watched was simple. A man hearing, in real time, exactly how serious his situation was. And you could see it hit him. Ranata explained that the HOA was facing liability for trespass, unauthorized use of private property, and using images of private land for commercial promotion without permission. She added potential claims from Cascade Charter Services for the failed route, and from ticket holders for a broken event. She made it clear the total risk was far bigger than whatever budget they had planned. And she told him the only way to reduce that risk started with admitting the route should never have crossed private land without the owner's consent, and ended with a formal resolution that covered everything in writing. At that point, Stewart made one last move. He offered me a payment on the spot if I would unlock the gate and let the tour go forward. I answered through Ranata. I told him we were past that point. The gate was not opening. Any discussion about fixing this would happen through attorneys. And the event was not happening on my land under any condition. By noon, the buses started turning around. Anyone who understands logistics knows what that means. 50 charter buses on a 2-lane county road is not something you fix quickly. It took time. A lot of time. And there is no need to go into detail because anyone can imagine what that looked like. By 2 in the afternoon, the road was finally clear. The crowd had left. And the Ridgemont Valley Autumn Heritage Tour was over. It had visited no heritage and no valley. Instead, it created a traffic situation that the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office later described in a public statement as one of the most unusual Saturday mornings they had seen in a long time. The legal process moved at its own pace, like it always does in Montana. Slow, steady, and deliberate. That worked in my favor. Every week added more documentation to a case that was already strong. Ranata filed the formal demand the Monday after the event. It covered unauthorized use of my property, unauthorized commercial use of images, and the costs I took on preparing for and handling that day. She also filed a complaint with the Montana Board of Realty against the HOA's management company. They had approved the event plan without verifying land access rights. That is a basic failure at a professional level. 2 weeks later, Stewart's attorney responded. The negotiations lasted 3 months. In the end, we reached a settlement I considered fair and complete. The HOA paid all of my legal fees. They paid damages covering the costs Ranata had documented. They also paid a separate amount for using a photo of my land in their promotions. That image, I later learned, came from Stewart's personal phone and had been used without any proper permission or rights check. The HOA also signed a written statement confirming that my road and gate are private property and that no access rights exist for any Ridgemont Valley resident or HOA event. That statement was officially recorded in Gallatin County and attached to the property records. Cascade Charter Services filed their own claim against the HOA over the failed contract. I was not part of that case, but I heard it was settled. Ranata mentioned that their attorney called the outcome satisfactory, which told me enough. It likely meant the HOA's future event budget would not look anything like the one Stewart had built. Stewart Briggs did not run again for HOA president when his term ended 8 months later. Patricia Hensley, who still calls me now and then with updates, said he told people at the annual meeting he was stepping away to focus on other priorities. That is usually how people say they don't want to be remembered as the guy who planned an event that ended with 50 buses stuck at a locked gate while 2,000 people asked for refunds. The new board president sent me a letter about 6 weeks after taking over. It was short and professional. She introduced herself, said the board understood the importance of respecting private property, and said she hoped for a better relationship going forward. I wrote back, kept it simple, and said I appreciated that and felt the same. That was the last direct contact I have had with the Ridgemont Valley HOA since everything was settled. My gate is still there. The heavy-duty padlock is still on it. I still have the only 2 keys. And every autumn, when the light hits the Bridger Range just right and the grass changes color, I think about that Saturday. I think about 50 buses lined up on a county road. I think about Stewart standing at my fence asking me to open a gate he never once asked permission to use. I think about the coffee I finished on my porch while he made call after call. I think about Ranata pulling up, the deputy leaving, and the long, slow process of those buses turning around one by one. I don't think about it with anger anymore. That part is done. The settlement handled what needed to be handled. The county records say what they need to say. And no one has tested that gate since. What I do think about is this. When it comes to private land, the strongest position you can have is simple. Know what you own. And be willing to stand at the edge of it while the other side realizes they have no plan when you say no. 2,000 people bought tickets to see my land that autumn. Not one of them saw it. But every single one of them now knows it exists, and knows exactly who it belongs to. And honestly, that might be the most effective lesson about property rights a working cattle rancher in Gallatin County could ever give without saying a word in public. If you have ever had someone assume they could use something that belonged to you, and then had to learn the hard way that assumption is not permission, I want to hear your story in the comments. Those moments matter. The way people react when a gate is locked tells you everything about whether they were ever ready to hear the word no. Subscribe for more, and share this with anyone who owns land or has ever wondered if a strong lock is worth it. Because in my experience, the answer is always yes.